This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapin. Joining me this week for episode 358, A Swamp Creature and the Scientist Observing Their Living Conditions, Paul Jasley.
Hey, everybody.
And Ari Gross.
Hey there.
Thank you both for joining me this week. Kara couldn't make it this week. She has laryngitis, and we're all wishing her the best so that she can get her voice back so that we can hear her wonderful sultry tones here on the show again. I don't know if that's the right word to describe Kara, but that's the word that I'm using. I want to say thank you again to everybody who showed up to the live broadcast of episode 357 last week on YouTube and Twitch. We had overall 25 people concurrently watching at one point, which is insane. I didn't think that many people even listened to this show, so that is fantastic. But I guess to get into things, before we jump into the legally mandated questions that I have for the episode, we have a special guest on this episode. Ari, welcome to I Read Comic Books. Could you tell the folks at home a little bit about yourself?
Hey, everyone. My name is Ari Gross. I have been writing comics I started writing about a couple years ago, but I've started coming out in the world about 1 year, maybe a little over a year ago, mostly focusing on short stories, although I now have two ongoing series that I've been working on. The first has some art and coming out for it, and by the end of the year you'll be seeing it. And this comic that I'm going to talk about right now, called Awakening, that's a one-shot sci-fi. I do a lot of sci-fi, do a lot of horror. That's sort of, I guess, what I lean towards. And yeah, I've been reading comics as far back as I can remember. On the floor in my bedroom as a child, Batman open. I think I had the Untold Tale of Batman, or the one done by Len Wein, where they had a tape that you could play as well. I have very fond memories as a child of that. So yeah, I've been reading them my whole life, and at some point I decided I'm just going to start writing them because I have stories that drive me crazy because they're not existing in the world yet. So that's what I'm doing.
Hell yeah,
nice.
Dude. Well, welcome to the show. That's really exciting. I did not know that there was a comic that had a tape that came with it. Paul, you nodded as if you maybe know what this is. What the heck is this thing?
Well, that might not be the first Batman comic I read, but it's the first Batman comic I remember reading until the covers came off. I had the same edition. It was a giveaway that they gave away if you mailed in enough box tops from the Batman cereal. You got the 3 issues of the Untold Legend of the Batman. And it came with a cassette tape that was basically a narration of the story. You could read along with the tape. And there's a theme song for it. Very fond memories of that. That is definitely one of my favorite comics of all time.
No way. So, Ari, I guess you were in the same boat here then.
Yeah, I just looked it up. 1980 is when it came out. Written by Len Wein, pencil by John Byrne and Jim Aparo. Classic Batman, right? And so that's sort of
cool.
Late 70s, early 80s Batman was kind of my introduction. And then I read a lot of Spider-Man in the 90s and sort of more Marvel stuff. And then I read Sandman sometime in the early 2000s. And my mind being blown, just continued to go down, whatever. I was like, oh, wow, comics can do things, that giant rabbit hole of wow, this is, not a genre. This is a medium, and you can do whatever you want. And it's extremely freeing because, the human imagination plus the ability of artists to draw amazing stuff just can result in anything.
Hell yeah. And people scoff at motion comics, okay? The future is now, everybody. That's all I'm saying. If we could listen to tapes and read comics, we can certainly read animated comics, right? No, that's a joke. Motion comics suck ass. Before I get onto a soapbox, though, let's actually do the thing that we do here every week. Danny in the chat is saying, how dare I? I don't care, Danny. I just don't care. You can't make me do anything. Let me get into the legally mandated questions that I have for this show. Every single week we ask people, how have you been? How have comic books been? So I guess since I didn't number anything in my notes here, let's just start with you, Paul.
Sure.
How have you been? How have comic books been?
I've been good. For those who are curious, we have a West Michigan weather report. It is still winter here in West Michigan. It's about the mid-20s today. We had probably about 3 to 5 inches of snowfall last night, so we are not done with winter yet. But oh well. It's a clear skies today so far. In terms of comics, I've got a couple things here that I wanted to talk about that I read recently. First one being Madman, the Odyssey. This is, of course, written and illustrated by Mike Allred and letters by Laura Allred. And I actually found this at my local shop a couple weeks ago when I was there digging through the bins. And this is a trade that came out in 1993 that reprints the first 3 issues of Madman comics from 1991.
Nice.
Pretty cool little package here. I've read a big chunk of Allred's Madman stuff over the years when it was being published in the 90s or late 90s, early 2000s. And then when I got back into reading comics a little over a decade ago, there was an Image series that kind of followed up on that. So I followed that stuff. But I'd never read these early Madman stories before. So it was kind of cool to see the origins of not just Madman, the character, but Mike Allred's style. And what's kind of cool is that his style like really hasn't changed. To have somebody like to still be making comics like what 30 years later, and it's like this style like is still pretty much there. It's a little bit looser at times around the edges, and it's not colored because they're so used to seeing Mike Allred's art being colored by his wife Laura. This is all black and white and grayscale, but it's still there. It's still unmistakably Mike Allred in terms of the artwork and in terms of the story. Madman, for those that don't know, it's not quite a superhero. It's like the late 80s black and white indie comics version of a superhero story. Madman is a character who has no memory of who he is. He basically has amnesia. And these first 3 issues are him trying to regain his memories with the help of a couple mad scientists. He also fights an evil mad scientist who's trying to steal his other friend mad scientist's recipe for bringing back dead human tissue, because it turns out Madman is basically a John Doe character who's given the name Frank Einstein by the scientist that rescued him. It's fun stuff. It's kind of cartoony. There's parts that remind me of almost like a Bugs Bunny-esque sort of action humor. There's a lot of pop culture references. So if you know Mike Allred's artwork, but maybe not read this stuff, it's pretty fun to go back. I know it's been collected in a lot of different versions over the years, but it's very fun stuff. It's kind of a nice trip down memory lane. Like I said, I was reading this stuff as a teenager, so it's kind of cool to go back and read more Mike Allred stuff, particularly that early stuff.
Yeah, the only Madman that I've ever read was that, because I got sucked in, because I'm a sucker. Let's be honest here. Every once in a while, something will happen over at Image Comics, and I go, I gotta try this. And they did that Madman's 3D special where you got the glasses and stuff, and it was like a $12 comic book because it was oversized. It was like 100 pages, and it came with the 3D glasses. And I think I talked about this way back on the show when this happened, but I will rehash it for those of you who maybe didn't listen to the episode 7.5 years ago. I remember trying to read this and trying in all sorts of different lights, under sunlight, under like yellow, lights from a lamp, under the fluorescent lights of like a corporate building. And at no point could I actually discern what was going on when you put the 3D glasses on, because it just did not work very well. Like, I think 3D works under specific circumstances, and I don't know if comic books are the right medium for that. Like, comic books can do anything. I don't know if they can do 3D very well. I don't know if you guys remember that at all, but that was such a weird thing. And I was like, yeah, let's get this. It's this weird polybag thing. And then I opened it up thinking I should have just saved it, and made the money later, but oh well.
Yeah, I only know the those 3D issues of Final Crisis that Morrison and Doug Mahnke did, and that actually worked when you put on the glasses for those. So I don't know, maybe you read it under the red Kryptonian sun. That was the trick. You needed that to make it work. So
yeah, wrong circumstances. I see.
There was the 3D Alan Moore League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I forget which one is it. The back of the dossier, maybe the back of the black dossier or something like that. But where you go to the Prospero takes everyone to the, I forget what it's called, Blazing World. And it has these glasses that are one red and one green, and the glasses are, and you need to put them on to like actually see what's going on. Otherwise, it's just this 3D pages.
Interesting.
I recall it working okay, but it was definitely more of a concept and an experiment than like this is good comics now. Like, he didn't do that in the next issue. It was like, we're doing this and it's fun and it's a thing that the readers can get involved with, and I'm Alan Moore, and like whatever goes. But yeah, that wasn't kept on, probably for a reason.
Well, Ari, I guess let's jump right over to you. How have you been? I know we kind of talked to you already, but how have you been outside of being a comic creator and things? And how have comic books been? What have you been reading?
So I've been doing all right. Like I was saying to everyone before, I'm based out of Toronto. I'm originally from Montreal, and I'm actually back in Montreal this weekend to see some family for a bit of a visit, and just be swamped by the staggering amount of snow that we have here, which is not unusual for Montreal. It's I just looked up the weather. It's -9, which in Fahrenheit is about 15 degrees. So, not super warm and snowy, and just kind of fun, which has been great because Toronto's always milder. So I'm here with my daughter, and so she's like tramping through snowbanks and stuff like that, and just mind blown by the quantity of stuff everywhere. So so I've been pretty good. One thing I've been reading that I really enjoyed, finished it a couple nights ago, is called She Eats the Night. It's part of the Night Eaters. So I don't know if you guys read Monstrous or are familiar. I assume you've heard of it, if nothing else.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Monstrous has been written by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda. It's or written by Marjorie Liu, art by Sana Takeda. It's gorgeous, which is one of the main
Mhm.
draws of. I mean, it's well written, but it's also gorgeous. Sana Takeda is this amazing artist. And Monstrous was this large fantasy series that I, read every time a graphic novel comes out. I take it out from the library, but it's huge and sprawling and very big. And they've recently gone and done a much smaller, tighter story, a very different type of story called The Night Eaters. And The Night Eaters tells the story of this Chinese American family that's growing up in New York. I guess the kids originally grew up in Hawaii, but they moved to New York. The parents are originally from China, and it deals with sort of multi-generational differences. The mom
Hmm.
is very hard ass, impossible to please, always just sort of scouring and smoking. The dad, while being nice and happy with the kids, is still, he defers to the mom on everything in terms of like the child raising things. And the kids are what they describe as successful but soft. The dads at one point they're like, "Why don't you tell us all this stuff?" And dad's like, "Well, you two are kind of soft. Like we raised you to be that way. We raised you to be these kids that didn't have to do with the old world stuff that we've dealt with." And so instead of being a comic and being sort of a fantasy and a horror story, the old world stuff is sort of demon related stuff. I won't give it away too much, but
Mhm.
there's a
Sure.
house across the street, and it looks super haunted and creepy, and there's creepy dolls, and there's terrifying horror plant stuff going on. And at one point the mother's just shoves the kids in there, and sort of like, basically, "I'm done coddling you. You two deal with this. Like, figure it out." And it's then the terror begins. And this is part yeah, and so this is part one of three. So by the end of part one,
Yeah.
you get a little flavor of sort of what's really the story with the parents, and why are they doing these things, and why did the mom take a chunk out of her arm and bleed all over the floor and then eat a heart, like all the weird terror stuff that it
Hmm.
gets into. But it's really
Sure.
fun.
Yeah.
The characters are really well. I mean, everyone's really well drawn, of course, because just the art is amazing.
Yeah.
But they're very well written. There's a real interesting generational divide, and they flash back to the time before the parents immigrated from Hong Kong. Uh, so shows a bit of their origin, and it kind of slowly teases out what's happening. So it's well paced as well. It's the first of, I think, three hardcovers, and yeah, I don't know when the next ones are coming out, but I just read the first, and I
Hmm.
would strongly recommend it to anyone who can get their hands on it.
Yeah, I've been waiting for this to come out as well. I haven't had a chance to pick it up, but I'm probably going to grab the hardcovers because I need to get Marjorie Liu Sana Takeda books like in my life. Because I
Uh-huh.
read through, I have all the like digital editions of Monstrous, and I love it. I haven't read all of it yet, but like if I could just get more of their stuff in my life, I'd be very, very happy.
Yeah, I was very happy to see that they were doing another series together, because I thought they worked so well for Monstrous, and it's neat to see them doing just a different thing and also a much smaller thing, because Monstrous is huge and sprawling. And every time a new
Hmm.
trade comes out, I go to the library, I take it out, and then I have to like remember all the things that happened, because it's this huge like Civil War fantasy thing, all these
Yeah.
characters. So this is a bit refreshing, just in terms of we're telling a family story, and it jives very much with some of the stuff I've been thinking about and stuff I've been writing about, which is about sort of I've got this one series, maybe we'll talk about it later, that I've been writing, which is a family horror thing, a house horror thing as well. So I'm always happy to read more
Ooh.
stuff that's like in line with the way I'm thinking about things. And sometimes you
Sure.
get inspiration, sometimes sometimes you don't, and I don't know, so it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, for me, things have been pretty chaotic. I said this before we started recording, but I have a bit of a toothache, so I'm going to the dentist on Monday, which is going to be really fun. But beyond that, I did manage to sit down and read some comics. Unfortunately, I read like only comics that are like really deep into a series, or stuff that people have already talked about like at length on the show, because everybody keeps reading all these good comics, so I have to also read the good comics. But then Nick White regular on the show, sent me a random, or he didn't send me a random email. I got an email from Amazon, and it was like, "The Spy Superb has sent you a special delivery." And I was like, "What the hell is this?" I thought I had entered some giveaway for the Spy Superb comic book that came out, and I got a copy of Spy Superb #1, and I was racking my brain trying to figure out if like I entered something to get a free copy of this book, and I was like, I wouldn't do that. I don't really like Matt Kemp books that much. Uh, and it turns out that Nick had actually just bought this book for me. So the jerk that he is was like, if you're not going to buy this book, I'm going to buy it for you and make you read it, and then lord over you the fact that I bought this book for you until you read it. And I was like, okay, Nick, geez, oh Pete's. But Nick did talk about this book a couple weeks ago, so you've already heard a bit of what this story's about if you listen to those past episodes. But long and short, a doofus becomes the ultimate spy. That's pretty much the gist of this book. And I will say, I actually liked this book more than I thought I was going to. Like, and don't get me wrong, I like Matt Kindt books. I have an entire section of my huge Calyx library of comic books dedicated to just Matt Kindt books that I own. But I am not. I feel like the last couple books that I've read from him have not been insanely good as I have hoped or I felt about his previous work. So going into this, I was like, you know what, I'll just wait for the trade. I'm sure it's going to be fine. It's going to be a good book. It's him and Charlene, his wife, doing the entire shebang, writing and drawing and coloring and stuff. But it turns out that this book is pretty good. And it's really wordy. It's got a lot of smart characters and chaotic action moments that you would expect from Matt Kindt that are like both kinetic and also extremely frozen in time. Like Matt Kindt's art style to me does not lend to like really high action stories, and yet he keeps doing books that are about high action things. So it was really interesting to see this book where it's like a Mr. Magoo type story where you're like, somehow this guy, he's walking blindly through a construction site and everything is falling around him and he's somehow fine. And that's kind of like the focus of this book is idiot super spy, which is very, very funny. So yeah, I like it. I liked what I read for a free first issue that Nick bought for me. I totally think that everybody should get Nick to buy you the first issue of this book. But you know, Charlene Kint's colors are great. Like this book really does a great job of steadily slipping from serious super spy universe into a dumb comedy very, very naturally without you realizing it until the very end. You're like, oh, that book was actually funnier than I thought it was going to be. So if you didn't get a chance to check this out, wait for the trade, or get Nick to buy you a copy. That's all I could say. I don't know. Did Nick buy this for you, or did you end up checking this out at all?
No, I feel a little put out because Nick didn't buy me a copy. So where's my copy, Nick? I
don't know.
I think you kind of like have the same approach as I do. Like I like Matt Kindt books and I read them, but like, is this tied in with the super spy stuff? Because I read some of that and I feel like it's one of those things like I don't know where to go with it. It's almost like reading Mike Mignola, where it's just like, where do you go with Hellboy? There's so many different things. You just jump in at random points, and I kind of got lost with that stuff.
I haven't read any of the super spy stuff.
Okay.
I think this is just it's unfortunately titled. Maybe.
Yeah,
or if it does tie back into his super spy work, I don't know how it does because I haven't read that series stuff.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Well, Paul, any other books that you read before we move forward, I guess?
I did read the newest issue of The Human Target. That's number 11, the penultimate issue of the series, written by Tom King, art by Greg Smallwood, letters by Clayton Cowles. Sounds like everyone is enjoying the series based on your responses in the video here.
Yeah, our video responses that everyone can definitely hear. Great radio. Great radio.
Yeah. This is a great series. We talked about it on the show before. It's just a really engaging story. It's a good mystery story. Although at this point, I feel like we kind of know what happened. Like at this point, it's the penultimate issue. The mystery of who accidentally, quote unquote, poisoned Christopher Chance, the human target, has kind of been solved. And this issue kind of gives him and Ice a day to just reflect on their relationship and what they've gone through. Christopher Chance gets to ruminate on the nature of life and death, and Ice gets to have a sort of a moment where she explains her side of the story, what she has been going through, what she's been dealing with. And there's a really beautiful moment where, and of course the whole book is beautiful because Greg Smallwood's artwork is unreal on this book.
Dude.
When she's telling a story, it's kind of like a monologue where on each side of the page there's like snapshots of what she's describing. and then the dialogue is kind of running parallel to it. So it's not quite a normal comic book page, and it kind of breaks the rhythm of the book in a really interesting way.
Hmm.
And there's something about the way that Smallwood chooses the colors for it. It's like all these really like contrasting oranges and greens and blues. It just pops off the page. And so it's, again, every issue of this book, I just have to stop and stare at just like, why did he choose that particular color scheme and why does it work so well? You know, there's very few books that make you kind of like stop and think about particular color choices. And the whole series so far has been this. So I'm guessing there might be a twist in the next issue, the final issue. Who knows? Or this was the end of Christopher Chance. Who knows?
You think DC loves killing their characters or what? Like, you think they actually will do that? I mean,
they only let Tom King do it between Scott Free and Christopher Chance. It's like, well, do whatever you want, you know?
True.
And the last book he did.
Yeah.
And
which one was that?
Strange Adventures.
Oh, Strange Adventures too. Yeah.
Strange.
Yeah, can we just talk about how unbelievable Greg Smallwood is again? I feel like this has been like the thing I've been saying on this show for many, many years now, but I have never seen more beautiful comic book pages in my life than I've seen in The Human Target. Like unbelievably beautiful, just simple. I mean, they appear simple, right? They probably are actually like incredibly high crafted. Like he spends hours meticulously laying out pages and stuff, but like there are pages in this book, I think around like issue 4 or 5 or 6, where you see you see the Ice and Christopher Chance like hanging out, and they're just like going for a drive, and it's like some of the most beautiful, picturesque comic book pages you've ever seen in your life. And I'm like, where does that talent come from? Who the fuck is Greg Smallwood, and how is he allowed to do this to us? You know, I just that book is so good. It's easily some of his best work ever. You know, which is crazy because he's done some miraculous stuff in the past.
Upsettingly good is how I describe it to myself, because I'm reading, I'm like, I want to flip to the next page because Tom King's writing, like, you know, when it moves, you know, it doesn't always move. Sometimes it's more, you know, more plotted, more paced, more dense. There's a couple issues like that, but when it does, I'm like, I want to see what happens next. But I also just want to stare. Like, I'm gonna take I can always go back and look at it. You know, you got it so you can see it, but it's so good.
Unbelievable.
Greg Smallwood put a thing on a little while ago about Twitter about a bit of a deep dive into his art process, which was very illuminating, where he said I basically use 3 different styles or 3 different approaches. I draw the hands and the face in this detailed approach. I draw everything else in a like the rest of the body in a different style. Then I draw the background and everything in a different style. And he talks about his inspiration from 1970s Disney animation, where if you look at 101 Dalmatians, the lines, the coloring is not lined up with the outlines. So everything is a little off. And that's what's going on in this book. And anyway, it was a deep dive, sort of, you know, long Twitter thread or whatever into this. And it was just like the most, you know, like that's what I want out of this. I don't want people debating bullshit on Twitter. That's not what I'm there for. I'm there to hear someone be like, here's how I do my art. It's like, it's way more than you think it is. It was like, yeah, it is.
What's amazing, it can be that complex of a process, but it doesn't look complicated. That weird trick of being able doing something that's so, you know, complex, but it just flows off the page. It looks like effortless. And that's the thing, that's the black magic that he's doing on this book, you know?
Yeah, that's the magic trick, is like, it looks like, obviously it's just but then you start looking closer and you're like, there's way more going on here than, like, you know, you would notice. But it's so good. The colors are phenomenal.
Oh
yeah. Jeez. All right. Listen. All right. We can do a whole episode on Human Target. Maybe one day we will. Let me talk about one more book before we take our break. I read. So there was Shonen Jump. If you're not familiar, you know, puts out a magazine every week in Japan. Here in the United States, they don't. I think you used to be able to buy it. I think you can still buy. I don't know how you get it in English digitally. But instead, if you're one of the people like me, I subscribe to the Shonen Jump app, which is like $3 a month to get access to everything that Viz, for the most part, publishes in English in chapter format. And they put out a new chapter for a brand new series called Jiangshi X, which is by Norihiko Kurozono. And the synopsis that they give is not what the first chapter's about, and that's fine. That's usually how, like, the opening of manga is. And the synopsis they give is: a silent darkness threatens 1,000 years of peace. Who can stand up to a great evil in Jiangshi? Young warriors become the light that defeats despair. Welcome to this new Chinese battle fantasy series. And, like, I don't really know too much about, like, like Chinese history or like the history between Japan and China. Like I'm just some guy who lives in America, but I did watch and read Dragon Ball. So I know that what is it? Going to the West or coming to the West
Journey to the West.
is a thing. Journey to the West, thank you, is a thing. And I can definitely see some inspiration of that Akira Toriyama took in his book. It's kind of reflected in this Jiangshi X, and yeah, it's a pretty interesting book. It was 91 pages in as a first chapter, which is significant for a first chapter in Shonen Jump. Now, I found out this is a one shot that was published, so that's why it was a little bit longer. In my mind, all I can think of was the Viz company, Shonen Jump, Seshwa, the company that is in Japan. They're really, really pushing this book because it feels like it's got all of the trappings of merchandising and anime potential and like really cool characters. Like there's this whole very wholesome trio of characters who are all trying to become essentially these warriors who can go out and fight these vampire monsters that exist in the world because something bad happened. Darkness is looming over everything. And yeah, I think it's really, really fun. And I love the first chapter. Like every time I was like, oh no, it's going to fall into this dumb shonen trope. It took a left turn in a way that I found to be interesting and still felt like the vibes of Dragon Ball or Naruto, where young kids, where we have all this hope to be the most powerful versions of these warriors. Yeah, I thought it was a really good book, and I think that it's going to be probably a very promising, like, I could see this go for 100, 200, 300 chapters without any steam being let up because fans are probably very rabid for this type of book. So if you get a chance, it's free. You can go read it at the viz.com/Shonen Jump. We're not sponsored. I just think everybody should read it because it's pretty good. If you want some fun battle manga that does things that make it less cringy than things like Dragon Ball or Naruto or whatever. And I know I say that with love in my heart for those series, but anyways, I don't know. Paul, I want to get your take on it. That's where I'm sitting right now. 91
Okay.
pages. I promise you'll read it in 10 minutes. It's great.
I'll check it out. I'm trying to be more open-minded and read more manga this year. So there we go.
Okay. The fabled Kate and Renee's manga show, where you're going to be the first guest on that we're going to do on Patreon.
Perfect.
Well, cool. I guess we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk to Ari a bit more about their Kickstarter that they have coming right now. And we're going to talk about what's on the top of our pile. So we'll be back in just a second. Hey folks, I want to tell you about a new comic podcast I've been turned on to called The Comics That We Love. It's a show hosted by Zach McCrary, a lifelong comics fan who has always felt that comics were more than just capes and cowls. He believes that comics can touch every emotion and can help us understand the world around us. Each week, Zach and a guest sit down to discuss a story that cemented their love of sequential art, learn about the people who created it, and then break down what it is that made that story great. Whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, horror, manga, or superheroes, you'll leave every episode with a much deeper understanding of the book that they discussed. Sometimes he's joined by creators to talk about what it's like to bring their characters to life. Recent episodes include The Incredible Hulk, Future Imperfect, Captain America, Winter Soldier, Brian K. Vaughan's Saga, Chainsaw Man, and Akira. I'll say listening to a few episodes of this show has astounded me with the depth at which Zach dives into these comics, and it's been a real treat to listen to. The Comics We Love is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts, as well as everywhere else you can download and stream podcasts. You can also follow the show on Instagram and TikTok at @thecomics_that_we_love for more. This week on I Read Comic Books, we're talking to Ari Gross about their Kickstarter that's coming up. But before we get into that, we've got to get into the books that are on the top of our pile, comics that are new or old, or just books that have been sitting on our shelves that we finally are getting around to. So let's talk about comics that are on the top of our pile. Ari, what are you reading next? What's on the top of your pile over here?
So I am looking forward to the Sins of Sinister event. Looking forward to a Marvel event. Insane, some might say, but
yes.
I really enjoyed the previous Kieran Gillen sort of X-Men, not just it was X-Men Eternals and Avengers, the Axe Judgment Day event, which worked really well as far as events go, because instead of doing the standard event thing of like, I don't know, like Null is attacking, now everyone has to fight a Null villain or something, the Judgment Day was like, justify yourself. And so it was just an excuse for a bunch of deep dive character studies, like Spider-Man has to, has to do the, like, do I do more good in the world? Do I, you get all that anxiety with Spider-Man, and then Dr. Doom has to justify himself, and he's like, bah, I'm Dr. Doom. Like the
Yeah.
It's so you get the good character moments that I think people are really looking for, and Kieran Gillen is great. Don't think that's a controversial statement at all. So if
Totally.
he's leading this, that's great, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does or what he continues to do with Sinister. So I read some X-Men back in the day, the '90s, mostly like, and my favorite X-Men villains were like, Magneto and a bunch of other stuff. I didn't really care for Mr. Sinister. I was like, oh, this clone guy, because at the time the Spider-Man clone thing was happening, and I just wasn't interested in that at all. I was like, oh, clones, yay! It's the '90s. Who cares about clones? Uh, I
A
was
lot of people care about clones,
a
actually, it
lot of
turns out.
people, yeah, that's very true, yeah. But I got really into Mr. Sinister recently because, and I think it started with, was it X-Men? I don't know. It was it Red, or was a previous? I think it was Kieran Gillen, where he started writing him as just this very sassy, like over the top, kind of campy, like amazing villain who's funny
Mm-hmm.
and always up to like shenanigans. Like everyone, and in the new Krakoa world, everyone's been like, Sinister's on side, but like we really don't trust this guy. And we
Right.
shouldn't. His name
Right.
is Mr. Sinister. Like he's not there for you. Yeah. And so now things that have
Right.
been building for a couple years at least are coming to a head, and it's interesting to see sort of how this all spills over. And it might be a super sloppy, terrible event. It might have a few fun moments, but either way, I'm curious to see what happens, and I want to read more Mr. Sinister.
Yeah. Well, I mean, did you read the Hellions run that came out as part of like this House of X, Dawn of X, Powers of 10, blah, blah, blah universe that we're in that Hickman caused? Because if you want to read more Mr. Sinister, that Hellions run is all about what if Mr. Sinister led a team of B-list X-Men characters, because they're all like former villains or reformed villains, and they have to basically do his bidding because he's the boss and he's in the Quiet Council. I think if you want more Mr. Sinister, Zeb Wells wrote that book. It's probably one of my favorite runs in recent history. But it's his Mr. Sinister is very different than Kieran Gillen's Mr. Sinister, who I think is cleverer. Zeb Wells's Mr. Sinister is kind of just a jerk with going on a power trip, which is a fun thing to read. But Kieran Gillen definitely feels like he's put a lot more effort into the sinisterness of Mr. Sinister.
Yeah, I did read Hellions, and I really enjoyed it. It was a great
Okay,
run, and it was nice too because it was a story. It ended more or less with the characters. Like it was always like nice to have them go on, but it's also nice to have like, oh, here's a great run that did a thing, and it accomplished its goal. Like its goal was to get
mm-hmm.
people invested in these other characters, maybe push things forward a little bit with some of them, and just have some like
Totally.
sinister chaos. Yeah, when you were saying the Mystery Sinister is a little different, I was wondering like, is it even the same Mr. Sinister? Like I can't even remember if they were
Oh
supposed
my
to be the
gosh. All
same
right, hold on.
clone.
That's a totally different thing. Totally different thing.
But yeah, I mean, obviously Zeb
um,
Wells and Kieran Gillian are going to write their characters a little differently, but they stick to the
yeah,
kind of like sassy, embrace the chaos. Sometimes he's more on the I planned everything along. Sometimes it's more on the just like grab the stuff and run, sort of
yeah,
version of
yeah,
the
yeah.
character. But either way, I had a great time reading that run, and yes, a strong second for that for anybody who wants to check it out.
Yeah, very, very rarely do I buy like full hardcover collections of series runs, and like that Hellions run was one of the very few that I own. But I will say, along the Sins of Sinister, so I read that because it came out recently, and Danny was talking about it a bunch, and I was like, okay, we got to read this. Shout outs to Danny, our good bud who's on the show, and yeah, so I read that, and I'm very excited because this event, however you want to call it, is like a sidetrack of all the existing X-Men runs, and I'm super pumped because it's Cy Spurrier and Al Ewing and Kieran Gillen, all like it's a British invasion of the X-Men. And I'm so hyped for that because right there, you've got three of the best names in Marvel Comics, as far as I'm concerned, writing the X-Men. They're my favorites. Like 2023 is coming up, Mike, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm feeling pretty good about it. But I'm glad you're excited. I'm curious. I'll be curious to hear what your thoughts are. If we'll have to stay in touch after the episode, of course. And I'm eagerly awaiting what you think about this. But Paul, what about you? What are you excited for? What's on the top of your pile?
Well, it's literally on top of my pile because I picked it up at the shop yesterday, and that is the Best of 2000 AD Volume 2. It's got this beautiful Becky Cloonan cover that I adore.
Nice.
This is the second volume of what they're calling the Ultimate 2000 AD mixtape. For those of you who have not heard me rave about 2000 AD or this series so far, Obviously, 2000 AD is the long-running British anthology series. It's best known for where Judge Dredd stories appear, but it's much more than that. And I think it's never quite broken into mainstream American comics culture in a big way, aside from Judge Dredd, really. And this is their attempt to kind of introduce it to new readers. So each volume of this best of collection will have new stories, classic stories from both the recent 2000 AD or older 2000 AD. So I raved about the first volume a couple episodes ago, maybe when it came out. And actually got a few listeners to pick it up on my recommendation, which is kind of cool. Glad they enjoyed it.
Nice.
Because I'm always hesitant to recommend stuff in case someone doesn't dig it. But this collection features a brand new Judge Dredd story written by Al Ewing with art by Colin Wilson. So there's their selling point right there. Yep. Classic Dredd story by Alan Grant and Mike McMahon. And again, I had this thought the other day, is like, it's very hard to pick a favorite Judge Dredd artist, but Mike McMahon is like top 2 for me. Like, so I'm very excited to read some classic Mike McMahon Judge Dredd.
Totally.
Aside from Dredd, we get another volume of Brink, which is the series by Dan Abnett and INJ Culbert. That's sort of the sci-fi mystery story. The first part of book 1 was in the previous best of, and it was great. So I'm excited to read more of that. In terms of classic 2000 AD, we'll get Nemesis the Warlock, the first chapter of that, written by Pat Mills and art by Kevin O'Neill, the late, great Kevin O'Neill. And then you can't have a 2000 AD story or a collection without some Alan Moore. So we get an ABC Warrior story written by Alan Moore, art by Steve Dillon and John Higgins. I mean, that's, again, all-star lineup, top to bottom in this collection. If it's anything like the first one, it's going to be a must-buy. So, yeah, excited to dig in.
Dude, I don't understand how 2000 AD flies so far under the radar with all the names that are in this book, right? Like, if you're talking about, like, this is like, imagine if you picked up a bootleg, bootleg tape off of the street of like random Beatles songs or something. Like, it's insane. Like, Alan Moore gets part of his start here. Like, Steve Dillon, it's unbelievable. I mean, Brian Boland eventually, like, it's insane the creative talent that's working in this magazine, and yet people are just like, I don't know if I really want to read an anthology magazine every month. It's like, are you crazy? And I say this because I'm one of those people too. Like, what am I doing sitting on my ass over here? It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like there's this whole other like thing that all your favorite British creators did this whole career before they came to the US, and like, you don't know about it. It's all secret. But I'm really glad the way they've structured these best of collections. It's that mixtape feel where you get new and old. It's a great collection of stuff. And the problem is, like, I know I'm going to read the first chapter of Nemesis the Warlock, which I've never read any of this stuff. I'm going to love it. I'm going to have to buy all the back, matter, all the collections of it. So it's great to buy this stuff, but it also makes you want to buy even more comics, which I guess is the point. But, my poor wallet doesn't really like it.
That's what a good comic should do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'd like to continue if I may, the 2000 AD sort of
Please.
love on. If there's one thing I would recommend is Alan Moore's, I think it's Tharg's Future Shocks, or the collection of Future Shocks and Time Twisters, which are these short stories. I think they're typically 2 pages long, black and white. I think a lot of it's Steve Dillon. Did I say Steve Dillon or?
Okay.
Sorry, I forget the author, but it's Alan Moore who's doing, or the artist. But Alan Moore is doing a lot of them. They're all these little short stories, just sci-fi short stories. Like classic, twists, 2-page long things. And if anyone wants to get just a glimpse into the mind of Alan Moore, at least when he was writing these, it's great. And I really love sci-fi short stories, the classic sort of Twilight Zone style twist, just a setup and like an interesting thing happens in it, and I think it's going one way but it's not, or whatever. And this is a great collection of that. I forget how it's been published. I think it's had a few releases, but Future Shocks is the one that I think that's the class of story or the type of story that are included in them, and Alan Moore's Future Shocks. If you look that up, you'll find it. That's my 2000 AD recommend. I'm pretty sure they all came out in 2000 AD. Like, I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
No, that's great. This is the thing. Like, somebody recommended, like Graham sent me an email saying, a listener to the show said, "Hey, Mike, you got to try out this Strontium Dogs book," right? And it's a collection of all the Strontium Dog, like 8-page stories, and I'm loving it. It's like every time I dig into 2000 AD, I'm like, you know what? I should just stop buying Western comics and just go back and read all of these old 2000 AD comics, and then I'll be truly satisfied and a real comics fan. or something. I don't know what I'll be accomplishing there, but I guess like speaking of folks that are listening to the show, I'm going to give a shout out to folks that are hanging out with us on Discord today, and they all sent over their picks, what's on the top of their pile. Danny, who's also proofless in the show, Danny's here, he's live with us, but he did give us a book. He's reading Dark Web Finale #1 from Marvel Comics. Sam is reading Deserter by Junji Ito. I keep seeing this on the shelf at my comic shop, and I'm very close. So Sam, let me know what you think of it. Stephanie said they're reading Akira. Keith's reading Superman Up in the Sky, classic stuff right there. And Graham is reading Monsters by Barry Windsor Smith, another book that I'm like, Fantagraphics keeps sending me promos like, Mike, have you read the book? Have you read it? I'm like, that cover freaks me out. I don't know if I'm gonna like it. But I've seen it on a couple best of lists, so I definitely should eventually check it out. I mean, like, can Fantagraphics publish a bad book, like a truly awful book? Spoilers, they can, because I've read one, but not all of them are bad. Most of them are really good. I usually like them. So Monsters has got to be pretty good, right? Paul, you're giving me some nods, like you understand what I'm talking about here.
I know what you're talking about. I see this book on the shelf every time I go to the shop, and I want to buy it, but it's this giant hardcover, and it looks intimidating.
It's a monster.
So
yeah,
literally,
it literally is a monster.
Yeah, but I love Barry Windsor Smith's artwork, so one day I'm gonna have to break down and just pick it up.
Yeah, totally feel you there. Maybe it'll show up on Hoopla or something. I feel like it's a disservice to read a book that's like oversized like this in a digital format, because like it was intentionally printed in this bombastic size for a reason. So maybe that's important. But yeah, just like scrolling through some of the preview pages, I'm just like, my God, like the detail in the artwork in this book.
Barry Windsor Smith slaved over this book for years for you to read it on your phone on the subway, Mike. So that's what you got to do.
Listen. This is like Christopher Nolan thinks that you should never watch a movie on your phone, and here I am. I'm watching Tenet on an iPad Nano. So, fuck you, man. But let me get into the book that I'm excited for, the book that's on the top of my pile, and that is Rock Candy Mountain Volume 1. This is written and drawn by Carl Starks, with colors by Chris Schweitzer, who would later go on to do 6 sidekicks of Trigger Keaton on art with Kyle Starks. So like this combo is killer. If you don't know what this book is, because I truly didn't, and I'll explain why. The synopsis is: come inside and meet the mysterious, unbeatable Hobo Jackson on his quest to find the mythical Hobo Heaven. Meet his sidekick Pomona Slim, but watch out for the devil and the FBI and the Hobo Mafia too. It's a fantastical fisticuff frolic through post-World War II America via the rails and back roads, through underground fight clubs, prison, and the hobo jungles wrought with dangers, hobo fights, jokes, and locomotive excitement. I mean, this feels like a Kyle Starks book. Like I've heard his voice in my head saying it out loud, and I'm like, okay, this is probably going to be the funniest comic book that I pick up this year. And I know this came out a long time ago, but I'll be completely honest. The reason why I avoided this book, not because I didn't know who Kyle Starks was, not because I didn't think it looked interesting, not because it's about hobos on a train. If you guys remember way back in the day, there was this YouTube video or series of YouTube videos about this unicorn, and they were gonna go up to Candy Mountain, Charlie. It was the dumbest thing in the world. I think I'm cutting into a really weird side of my internet history. But I could not stand those videos all throughout college. People thought it was the funniest thing in the world. It just never clicked for me. And I was like, I don't understand why we think it's funny that these unicorns stole a guy's kidney. And that's like the bit of the video. I don't know. So needless to say, I took that and it was ingrained in my brain, and I just assumed that anything that had the word Candy Mountain in it was not going to be good, which is why I avoided this book. It's the worst reason to not read a comic book, but here we are. I heard someone talking about Where Monsters Lie #1, which is coming out very soon, and which is written by Kyle Starks, and I'm like, I need more Kyle Starks in my life. What haven't I read in his backlog? And it turns out it's this. So I'm diving into Rock Candy Mountain. I don't know. How could I not trust Kyle Starks? That's probably the better question here.
Right.
I've got a copy of both volumes of this, like the trades at home of Rock Candy Mountain, and this is one of the comics that like I cried at the end. Like it's funny, really funny. It's also really emotional, and it's just so good.
Yeah.
It's so good. I really love Kyle Starks, and this is like up there in terms of my favorites from him.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the thing. Kyle Starks, he is a fantastic comic writer, right? He knows how to get you, and he knows how to like tell a funny story that has a lot of heart. Like if you read his Old Head book, I really like that book. I like found it to be ridiculous because it's like vampires and NBA Jam and like Space Jam all at once. It's so goofy, and yet there's like a heart at the core of the entire book. It's great. Like what was I doing not trusting Kyle Starks? That's what it comes down to. So I'm looking forward to that because Where Monsters Lie comes out next week, and I can't wait to get that with Peter Kowalski, who did Sex way back in the day. Fantastic artist. He also did a Marvel Knights Incredible Hulk with Matt Kindt, which was a beautiful book. Highly recommend that if you're looking for more Peter Kowalski in your life. But anyways, I think that about wraps it up for top of our pile. So I guess let's just jump right into things. Ari, you're working on a Kickstarter right now.
I am.
For the folks at home who maybe haven't clicked on the link in the show notes, could you tell us a little bit about that?
So I have my my first Kickstarter, my very first Kickstarter, baby's first Kickstarter, called for a comic sci-fi one-shot comic called Awakening. It is a Star Trek inspired sci-fi comic one-shot. It's actually 2 stories in one. There's the main story called Awakening, and there's a backup story called Chosen, which was previously published as part of the Scott Snyder Presents Tales from the Cloakroom anthology, which I was involved with. That's a bunch of us. So here, let me take you right back to my my comic origin story. So not the how did I read comics, because we talked a bit about that, but like how did I write them? So 2 years ago, I decided I'm going to write comics. There's a whole background to that, but a story for another time. I'm going to write comics. So I started writing this one series, very long. I put it to the side. After I did it, I wrote a story from beginning to end, or at least the end of the first arc of it. And everyone's like, that's great. Now learn how to write a comic. And I was like, but I wrote a comic. They're like, that's not, you just wrote it. You wrote a thing, but have you made a comic? I said, well, no. Have you worked with an artist to draw a comic? I was like, well, no. And they're like, do that first. Do a short. Do a few things. And so as part of learning how to do comics, which is of course different than learning how to do prose or anything else, I mean, there's some similarities, but it's a different medium with different rules and different conventions and stuff like that. I signed up for just on a whim, really, for the Scott Snyder comic class, which he offered. This is now in his second year, and he offered, I guess it was a year and a half ago or something when I started. So a bunch of us got together as part of the class, and pretty immediately into it, someone was like, hey, let's do an anthology. I was like, okay, like, sure. And because this is Scott Snyder's thing, his personal label or whatever is called My Best Jacket. Best Jacket. Jeez, I'm going to be like pillared for not remembering
it's something
this.
With the jacket. So,
it's not My Best. It's a Best Jacket Productions.
That's okay.
That's it. Best Jacket Productions, I think.
Yeah, Best Jacket Press. There
Press,
we go, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. BJP, yeah.
Yeah, Danny's got it. He's helping us in the Discord chat over here, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. Best Jacket Press, and Jacket is Jackett. It's a portmanteau of his 2 kids' names. I don't know. I forget what they are. Sorry, Scott. And so we decided to make an anthology based on the core theme of a jacket. So a jacket has to be in there at every step of the way. And so I wrote this sci-fi story about this kid who gets this jacket as basically like a Green Lantern style sort of thing, where it's like he's part of this space cop thing with a jacket. And this was a story called Chosen, and it's sort of like, what does it mean to actually be chosen? Is it because you're special or because you're something else? And so that was a 6-page story that got in there, and that sort of started me down the like writing the sci-fi thing. And so I felt like I wrote something that was kind of like a Green Lantern-y sort of, almost like wish fulfillment science fiction with a bit of a twist to it. And that got me thinking about other science fiction stories that I really wanted to write, or science fiction styles I wanted to write in. And I said, let's do Star Trek. I've thought for a long time, I'm not one of those people who's seen every Star Trek thing. I'm right now in my cousin's house who's just like, I just finished watching all of Enterprise 2. And now I've seen all of everything up to Enterprise, from like the original series, like all through DS9, all through Voyager. I'm like, that's a lot. I don't know if I have the time in my life to do that, but good for you.
There's a competition, I think, in the world of people who like watch Star Trek and people who watch like every episode of One Piece, the anime, right? Like, I think it's comparable in some capacity, right?
Yeah, I've decided, at least as of a couple of years ago, like if I'm going to write, I have to be super picky about like what I watch, just because otherwise, just time in the day and everything, So anyway, this is all a very long way of saying I wrote a Star Trek story. Which is not not a Star Trek TM story. It's I don't know, they're in the Confederation or like, whatever. So it's like, it's an obvious, like,
Sure.
the trappings of Star Trek, but with a different style of story. So the setup is it all
Right,
begins with
right.
a sort of a shock in the ship. The navigator, Lieutenant Lau, is like confused what's going on, and sort of turns to the readers and is like seeing something that no one else in the ship is seeing. And they're very, like he starts acting. He's kind of crazy. He gets sedated, taken off to med bay, and it's revealed that the ship is in front of this. They're in this new galaxy at the edge of this galaxy they've never been to. No one can get into it. It's called the Silent Spiral, and they're looking at the strange celestial anomaly, and they can't figure it out. And so it starts from there. And the questions are, why is he acting the way that he is? Is he seeing something that is there, something that is not there? How does this relate to the anomaly? What is the anomaly? And then gets to play on
Mhm.
all the different people's role in the ship. You have sort of the security officer comes in conflict with sort of the Vulcan type science officer. The captain's trying to keep the peace. You have people. So it sort of spirals out from there. Uh, so yeah, it's a
Cool.
nice self-contained sci-fi story. And I'm including Chosen in it because it goes very well with it. As people who read the story,
Mhm.
you'll get it when you get there. And in addition to those two stories, I also made a bunch of trading cards because I love comics trading cards. As a kid, I have
Hell
I
yeah.
have a binder. It's probably 6 inches thick of all like the Marvel and DC trading cards from like the '90s back
Mhm.
in the day. And that's
Nice.
all I wanted to do was make those, and just as like pure wish fulfillment child. So I made 8 trading cards for this, which I included in the back 2 pages, so you can read. They're all like basically character bios, but like I get to make stuff up, so it's just
Mhm.
sort of fun. As like I've already written the story, and now I just get to have a little bit of fun with it. So, and I get to be a little
Yeah.
funny with them as well. Where the story is a little less humorous than a lot of my other writing, which tends I try to keep it a little lighter, a little funnier as well, depending on what I'm writing. So yeah,
Sure.
this is going to be it's going to be a lot of maybe it's not going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot of me talking about this over the next month. I certainly hope that
Yeah.
people are interested and excited in it as I am. It's one of those things that's like finally my one shot comic is out. After this, like I'll have done a
Mhm.
thing, but like it's been just occupying so much of like my mind space, for like the last 6 months or
Oh,
whatever.
sure.
And it's
Sure.
kind of funny, at least for me, to be at the end of like almost there, almost done, like
Mhm.
almost like I can stop like obsessing over every last detail of like designing the thing and like making sure like the stars on the background of the interior cover look nice. Like I'm doing all the details
Mhm.
for this myself, so
Wow.
it's been an
Gotcha.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's
Nice.
perfect. You've answered like the first 9 questions that I had in our documents, so thanks for that. No, which is interesting because I feel like when it comes to self-published comics, a lot of people wear a lot of hats, right? It's very different than like working for a Marvel or DC or even Image in some cases, right? Because you'll hire out a designer and stuff, or you'll hire out like 4 or 5 different people. You've got editors, you've got assistant people, you've got all this other stuff. Whereas, and folks trying to figure out what cover is going to end up on your book. Whereas if you're self-publishing, for Kickstarter, like, or even just like publishing elsewhere, like if you're just like working with a small press publisher, you kind of have to sort all that stuff out because there isn't some company or anything working out. So how did you go about, like organizing, okay, we're going to get a cover that looks like this, or we're going to do, who's going to make the trading cards, who's going to do the layout of the book? I guess, how did you delegate, or how did you work with your other the co-creators on this book to make that all come together?
Yeah, so the first thing I did, obviously, I got the artist, color artist. My letterer is also my editor. The editor
Oh,
of one
cool.
of the editors of the Tales from the Cloakroom anthology, Aubrey Lynn Jepson, who has been a phenomenal person to work with. There's another editor,
Yeah.
Chris, who's also phenomenal to work with, but Aubrey has been my editor specifically for this and for all things that I've been doing sort of since and before, I guess. Yeah, she's great. So it was a pretty tight team, just the four of us. I decided because I liked, I have a little, I don't have a background in like visuals or design or something, but I taught myself a couple years ago Adobe Illustrator, and I know how to do that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. Plus, I was like, I want to learn how to do some things. This is when I was between jobs, and I was like, what am I going to do with my life? Before I got a job.
Mhm.
My day job, by the way, is as a data scientist. That's the pays the bills thing, which is. But there was a period in time between working for the government and like working at the science center and doing all these other weird and interesting things I've done in the past when I was like, I just don't know what I'm going to do. So I spent some time and just learned a bunch of computer skills, graphic skills. I'm not an artist. I
Hmm.
cannot draw, but I could do reasonably good vector stuff and design stuff. And so I
Sure.
was like, because I just sort of messed around with that a few years ago, I was like, well, this is a good opportunity for me to use those skills and just do everything myself. Like I, made the thing in,
Sure.
did all the pages in Illustrator, then, exported them to InDesign. So all the decisions of who's going to do what were like me because I just wanted to. Like all the trading cards, I was like, well, I just looked at a bunch of trading cards, see how they're designed, play with some stuff. I did export one thing, not export, sorry. I did do one thing that wasn't just me, and I got a logo because I decided I want to branding. I want to be not just Ari Gross Comics. I want to be something else. So my
Sure.
my trade name, I guess, whatever you call it, is College Street Comics because that's a main street in Toronto that I'm very close to, called the College Street. And I got a little logo, which is a little raccoon, a sort of a black and white raccoon logo. And if you go to my website,
Okay.
www.arigross.ca, that's arigross.ca, you can read all my comics, most of them for free. The ones that you can't is because they're being published by somebody else, and there's some agreement where I put, if you just keep scrolling through, you'll read whatever you can and anything you want. If you really want to read it, I guess you can send me an email and I may just give you the password because there's full versions of those as well. So I wanted to do a bit
Sure.
of kind of like branding for this. And then once I got the logo, I was like, well, I may as well just put it out under my own name. Now I'm a publisher.
Hmm.
Like, what's it take to be a publisher? Well, you just have to have, your, a name, and that's kind of it, right? You just do it.
Hmm.
Uh, so, I mean, I could have, I suppose, tried to shop the story around to individual publishers or something, but I wanted to do this one all myself just for the experience, to
Sure.
understand what it takes, and also to see if I want to do an ongoing series or, two ongoing series or however many in the future, would this be the kind of thing that
Hmm.
I would want to do? If it's like, if after 1 month of Kickstarter, I've decided like, this is great, I'm energized, I'm okay at it, let's do it again. That's cool. But if I find
Hmm.
out that like, oh God, why would I ever do this terrible thing again? Then maybe it's time to like ask, Scout or Volt or whatever, someone to be like, hey,
Sure.
start pitching story to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think like that's really interesting because I think when it comes to Kickstarter, I follow plenty of creators who are publishing like ongoing books every couple of months, right? Like I'm on volume or issue 6 of like a series. Like there was an 8-issue series that I followed to the very end digitally and then like got the hardcover at the end because like that's a way to get your books out there, especially once you start to build that audience. And I know that like there is, just like in regular comics, there's a drop off. But I think with Kickstarter and like a lot of self publishing, I think once you get your core audience, right, like a lot of them are probably going to stick around. If they're in for 1 or 2, they're in for like the full run, which I find to be really interesting. But I'm going to stop asking questions and pitch this over to Paul. Anything you want to ask Ari before I just talk forever?
Well, you mentioned this is a sci-fi and specifically Star Trek influenced. So the question is, you mentioned you haven't seen all of it, but is there a particular version of Star Trek or Star Trek series that you kind of gravitate towards or inspired this one in particular?
As an accident of the year of my birth and when I happened to watch television and what was on when I was watching, I watched a lot of Next Gen. So
Okay.
I was the next generation. Spilled a bit into DS9,
Boo.
and a bit of
Get out of here. You're
Voyager.
done.
Get out of here. I definitely loved. I loved a few episodes from the original series, but honestly, I haven't seen all of them or too
Uh-huh.
many. And some of them are just like the ones that I tended to watch for some reason. Was someone's like, "Hey, man, I got original series VHS. Like, what is it? Oh, it's the Planet Full of Nazis thing." I was like, "Okay." So you're watching, like, this is an interesting wardrobe-driven episode. Not the best episode of science
Right.
fiction I've
Right.
ever seen. Like, what's the moral? Is a planet full of Nazis is bad? I was like, wow, what mind blowing, like, so like not all Star Trek is like amazing, but I really like.
Sure.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
But my favorite, the reason I was attracted to it is the moral issues, and that's, I think, the core
Yeah.
about science fiction that for me is the most interesting, because it allows you to ask. I mean, other things allow you to ask these questions too, but science fiction really does in a way that I've always loved, is ask the interesting speculative moral questions. The thing about Star Trek, which I love the most as a teenager at least, was prime directive. What do you do if you see some people who
Mhm.
aren't doing things as you think they should be doing? You think it would be really great if you could help them, but should you help them or should you let them figure it out on their own? And so those kind of ethical questions are what gravitated me towards just the series, I guess, in general. Recently, I've been
Sure.
watching Lower Decks, which I love so much. Strange New
I've heard a
Worlds.
lot of good things about that.
Yeah, it's a fun show. I mean, it helps if you like, there's tons of Easter eggs, so it helps if you get all the references. But even if you don't, it doesn't really matter because it's a
Sure.
very character-driven show, and they take the time to develop the characters. The voices are great. Ryan North has recently written a few Lower Decks comics, which are phenomenal because Ryan North,
Nice.
and like it's a holodeck creates a version of Dracula which is sentient, and so they can't get rid of it because it's a sentient life form. So they're like, is this good? Like, we made Dracula. Can holodeck Dracula be good? Does he deserve to live his best life, or is he just a disaster waiting to happen?
What the hell?
Which is just such a great thing to like do. And Ryan North, in typical sort of Squirrel Girl optimistic, which jives so well with Star Trek, is like, yeah, maybe like, Dracula deserves a shot. Like, it really gets you to like, if we can redeem Craven, who like buried Spider-Man for 2 weeks in the ground, in Squirrel Girl, like, can we redeem Dracula, right?
Sure.
So yeah, I've really enjoyed all that stuff, and I love writing sci-fi. I don't. The two series that I'm working on right now for ongoing series are not sci-fi, but every time I think I want to write like a short or a one-off, I keep going back to sci-fi, just as like, again, I guess it comes from being obsessed with like these, like a 2000 AD sort of future shock kind of like short stories, speculative stuff, Twilight Zone kind of thing. Like, I just think it's so perfect for that.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting because one of the reasons I like reading 2000 AD, and like I'm a huge Dread fan. Even though it's science fiction, like Dread is always a reaction to what's happening right now.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
all science fiction in a way does that. Even though it's speculative,
Totally.
it's a direct reaction to the current political climate. That's all over Star Trek, obviously, but it gives you a way to address contemporary issues through a different lens without being, so on the nose at times.
That's right. And sometimes even in hindsight, it seems very on the nose. Like, is it the Star Trek where like, the characters are like black on one half and white on the other half? The other ones are black on one side and white on the other. And they're like a two-class society, and no one else aside from them sees any difference. Like that kind of very simplistic metaphor for race, but it, that's what's, like that's what you're talking about. So, let's use aliens instead of people. And then everyone can sort of, come to this in a way that doesn't, they can leave their personal history behind a little bit to deal with the bigger issues.
Right. It like takes an not objective, but it gives you a different angle for viewing these types of situations when you see someone else talking about it, and it feels so funny and weird and simple. Like that, how could they have this be a problem? And you're like, yeah, that's literally what we're saying in real life, dude. That's really interesting. So for folks that are like interested in the Kickstarter, I guess, like, what can they expect? I guess what's your goal? What are you driving for? What kind of deliverables are you guys aiming for? Like, if someone goes and backs, or supports you at the highest tier, like what kind of rewards can they expect out of the Kickstarter?
Yeah, so we've got some awards. The hardest part, before I even say what the rewards were, is deciding what not to do, because my first instinct was like, we're going to do 1 billion things. And I was like, no, man, you got to rein that in. Like, just focus, because it's so much fun to be just like, let's have 1 billion tiers. But I think we made it pretty focused. So the goal of the Kickstarter, first of all, it's running 25 days, begins February 1st, ends on February 25th, which is my 40th birthday. So I was like, I'm ending this on a momentous day, and I am no longer thinking about it after that, except for then I have to do the fulfillment, which I will definitely be thinking about it a lot after that. Excuse me. So I'm from Toronto, or I'm in Toronto. Well, I'm usually in Toronto. And so it's in Canadian dollars. The pledge, which is $1,750, I think that comes out to just $1,750. I think that comes out to $1,300 American and change, plus or minus a bit. Various rewards are, so we have a digital copy, we have a physical copy. The next little reward here is physical copy, or signed physical copy, plus backer recognition, so like a little extra. And you get a postcard. And this has been really fun designing the other stuff. There's a postcard, say Beach Day postcard. All the characters are hanging out at the beach. It's a piece of art that you will also see in the comic, although I will not tell you in what sense you will see it in the comic. That's part of the, is it an extra page? Is it part of the story? Who knows? You'll have to find out. But you'll get this nice little postcard that has on the back some information, sent from someone to someone else. So again, extra opportunity just to like, get into the characters, write a bit more story, flesh things out, have some fun with it.
Sure.
I have a sticker a sticker 6-pack, 7.5 by 10-inch sticker sheet with 6 stickers. Instead of doing the individually cut stickers, I decided to do a sticker sheet that you can just peel off because you get bigger stickers. So it's going to be fun. Some of them are the logos of the comics. Some are from Chosen. Some are from Awakening. And then there's that raccoon silhouette College Street Comics logo that I had designed as well. And then the top 2 tiers are, one is you get the other stuff plus a sketch, an artist sketch. So we're having an artist do some sketches. And once the Kickstarter campaign goes live, you'll be able to see that tier. And he has an amazing picture of Goldhawk, who is this sort of horned, badass security officer, sort of like, a Klingon type sort of figure. And then me just draped around her leg like some, woman in a loincloth from like a 1980s Conan, like cover or something like that.
Yeah.
In pure admiration. He did that, and he's going to send that one to me. So that's an example. So he's going to do sketches for people who want that, and I think that's going to be like,
cool.
If anyone wants a tier, that's a very good tier because he'll, send him a picture, he'll do you, and he'll do another character and whatever you want, and he has lots of fun with it. And then the final tier, we're selling the original comic art as well. So some of his pencils, some of the inks. He actually works in Greg Warrenchuk, he's out of Ottawa. And he works in sort of a combination of doing some pencils and inks and then scans and then does sort of digital touch-ups. And so the pages as they aren't exactly the pages as you get often because there's a few touch-ups and stuff like that, but it's the original page art. And so we're selling that as the highest tier. And a portion of the proceeds, anything we make, we're over the Kickstarter goal for that tier is going to be split with him as well. So, I mean, the artist is doing the work, the artist will get paid, not just, profiting off the artist by selling his stuff and then taking all the money. Like this is a collaborative effort for both of us to, get people who like it to get a little piece of art on their wall and, just have some fun and like buy into this like cool new world that we're creating and this, And the other postcards, I will also be including in some of the higher tier postcards that are blank on one side. So there's one that's like from someone that's, like a filled out postcard. Some that are going to be blank. So you can fill them out and send them to people. Send them to your friends who are confused why they have a postcard with a bunch of people on a beach that says, "Welcome to Paralia 9, and then maybe they'll.
I mean, to be honest, I am always confused whenever I get a postcard sent to me. So, like, regardless if it's got aliens on a beach or if it's just from, San Diego, I still don't understand why anyone sent me a postcard. So,
yeah. So I'm.
Well, Paul, get one last question here before we wrap up.
Well, I want to ask the big important question. Knowing a little bit of your comic book history, your big inspiration, reading Batman comics as a kid, I got to know, as one of the resident Batman experts here on the podcast, who's your favorite Batman artist?
A very hard question. I think my Batman is probably like...
We asked the tough question.
Yeah. Probably like... I don't know if it's Jim Aparo or Aparo. I'm terrible at pronouncing people's names who I've never heard spoken aloud. But between him and Neil Adams, I'd say that was a lot of the Batman that I read growing up. And whatever you kind of read as a young kid really forms the idea. And going back to those issues, like the art is great. Like before all these podcasts, I was like, maybe I should flip through Untold Legends of the Batman. I was like, yeah, these still look really good. Like, 40 years later, like, man, This is great. Like, I mean, there's so many good Batman artists individually. People like just, any issue can have great or terrible art depending on, what they're going for and what. Right now, I'll tell you what I've been really enjoying in terms of Batman characters, Batman family is Bruno Redondo, the Tom Taylor Nightwing. Mm-hmm. Just phenomenal art, just loving it every moment I flip through a page. Like the writing is great, the art is great, it all comes together so well. And I think for drawing like the Bat family, and they draw it with, of course, Nightwing has such a light to it where Batman, sort of in the shadows, Nightwing. I think it's like, the first issue of the Taylor was like, bursting into the day or something into the day. I forget the actual. Don't quote me on any of this stuff.
Of course it was.
Yeah.
No, sure. That's funny. But that's ridiculous.
But yeah, it's got that sort of uplifting feel to it, which is really nice and a great a great contrast to, let's say, like Tom King's run on Batman, like I Am Suicide, it's like dealing with like, or even
Right.
Scott Snyder
Yeah.
stuff, like, with the Greg Capullo art, which is like really cool, but it's a total different feel. So, as honestly,
Mhm.
Batman's one of those characters. Like, there is a Batman for all seasons. Like, whatever you want, there's a Batman for it. There's the happy Batman. There's the sad Batman. There's the scary
Exactly.
Batman. There's
Yeah.
the friendly Batman. Like, you just got to find it.
Yeah.
You're preaching to the choir over here. We did a whole Patreon series where we read through all of Grant Morrison's Batman run last year. And then this year we're doing a follow-up where we're going to be reading stories that inspired that and some of my favorite Batman comics. And Mike is the first guest on that Patreon series. And guess what we're reading, Mike? The Untold Legends of the Batman.
Oh
So you
yeah.
finally get to read it and see what we've been raving about. So
I'm very excited about this. I'll be completely
Nice.
honest, if only because I feel like someone has said that title so many times in my head. It needs to be clicked.
It's
Like
me.
there's just a blank
Yeah.
space in my brain that just needs to be filled with that. So I'm excited. But cool. Well, I guess Ari, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a super blast of a time. And I guess for the folks at home that maybe want to reach out to you and say hello, or maybe have some questions about the Kickstarter, or just anything in general, where can they find you on the internet if they want to reach out and say hi?
So you can always go to my website as www.arigross.ca. I think I may have do I have my personal email address on there, or an email address that you can reach me at? Yeah, you can always, so my email address is abgrss@gmail.com. I'm an email kind of guy, but if you happen to be on Twitter, you can at me at Ari B. Gross. And you can always sign up for my mailing list, which is what I will primarily try to inform people of things through, although I am very lazy about that, which I've been told is good, because people hate getting 4 billion emails. Like, so do I. So,
It's true. It's true. Well, cool. Yeah, we'll make sure to put links to all that stuff in the show notes and everything. But this is great. Good luck with the Kickstarter. Fingers crossed. I look forward to reading the full issue.
Thanks, man.
I should have said earlier, we did get a little bit of a preview that we passed around to the folks on the show today. But yeah, it looks great. I'm looking forward to reading the whole story. It should be a total blast. Like I didn't mean to say this earlier, but the art looks stupendous. Like the
thank you.
last page of the preview with the big anomaly looks really, really fun. Like the book is engaging 6 pages in. So like very much looking forward to reading the rest. For next week's show, though, for anybody who cares, who wants to come back next week, Brian, Kate, and I are going to be talking about comics and basically just all the things under the sun. We're taking a little bit of like a laid-back episode break. Should be fun. So if you have any comic recs that you want us to read before then, send them over to ircbpodcast@gmail.com, and maybe we'll try to read one or two of those. As always, you can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. Join our Discord. You can join our Goodreads, which is almost 1,100 people and growing every single day. It's crazy to get some really good comic book recommendations over there. All those links are in the show notes as well. You can support us on Patreon to get access to a better Batmobile, which Paul was just talking about. Season 2 is coming. IRCB Movie Club is going to be out at the end of February. And spoilers, we're talking about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. That's going to be a blast. Our good friend Kev from the Austin Danger Pod is going to be joining us for that. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music, and we can't thank them enough. Zander flies across the barriers of time, and I didn't change the ending to this again, but he's still flying, and we don't know when he's going to stop. He edits the show. We can't thank him enough. I want to say thank you to Ari for coming on the show again. Thank you to everyone on Discord for hanging out with us live. Thank you to Paul. Thank you to Danny for proof listening this episode. And if you got this far in the show, thank you for being a true dedicated listener to I Read Comic Books. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.